educativa, educar para la convivencia pacífica, emociones, adaptabilidad y metacognición. Es importante cuidar las normas de protocolo de nuestra universidad, así como los lineamientos de seguridad sanitaria para los aquí presentes. Le recordamos que una política adecuada de protección civil contribuye a disminuir los daños causados por desastres naturales, así como a reducir al máximo la pérdida de vidas humanas. Es por ello que les pedimos que en caso de una emergencia, fenómeno natural o situación de riesgo, conserven la calma y desalojen el auditorio de manera ordenada para concentrarnos en los puntos de seguridad que están ubicados fuera de este edificio. Muchas gracias. Para iniciar me permito presentar a la doctora María-Magdalena Isac, quien nos ofrecerá la conferencia magistral Pluralismo, tolerancia y convivencia pacífica, aportes del ICCS sobre las actitudes y la participación cívica de los jóvenes. Para participar con sus preguntas, les solicitamos que utilicen el código QR que se encuentra en la parte posterior de su gafete. Muchas gracias. La doctora María-Magdalena Isac es investigadora senior en la Universidad de Bath, Reino Unido, y directora del Estudio Internacional de Educación Cívica y Ciudadana, ICCS. Su trabajo se centra en la evaluación comparativa de los sistemas educativos, con especial interés en cómo los enfoques formales e informales, así como las prácticas de enseñanza, influyen en el aprendizaje y en el desarrollo de competencias ciudadanas en los jóvenes. Es doctora en Ciencias del Comportamiento y Sociales por la Universidad de Groningen, Países Bajos, donde también obtuvo una maestría en Investigación en Comportamiento Humano en Contextos Sociales. Cuenta además con una maestría en Política y Gestión de la Educación y una licenciatura en Ciencias de la Educación por la Universidad Alexandru Ioan Cuza, Rumania. A lo largo de su trayectoria ha desempeñado funciones de investigación en instituciones de reconocido prestigio en Europa, como KU Leuven de Bélgica, la Universidad de Groningen, el Centro Común de Investigación de la Comisión Europea en Italia y la Universidad de Bolonia, también en Italia. Cuenta con amplia experiencia en colaboración y consultoría internacional en educación cívica y calidad educativa, participando en proyectos impulsados por organismos como la UNESCO, UNICEF, el Consejo de Europa y la Comisión Europea, además de colaborar con ministerios de educación en Europa y América Latina. Cedemos la palabra a la doctora María-Magdalena Isac con este aplauso.
Gracias, buenas tardes. Es un placer, me da mucho gusto estar aquí con ustedes. Muchísimas gracias a las organizadoras por su invitación. Todavía no me siento muy segura para hacer toda la presentación en español, así que voy a continuar en inglés, pero puedo entender sus preguntas si tienen preguntas en español. Thank you very much for introducing me. I am here today to speak about the International Civic and Citizenship Education Study and how to approach in particular topics such as tolerance from the perspective and the data that we have from the ICCS study. And I know that you received the full introduction, so don't read the slide, but I wanted to tell you a little bit what brought me to the field of citizenship education. I think I was very fortunate. As you heard, I grew up in Romania, and I was from a very, very small town, one of the most unequal places in the world, so I worked very hard to end up in the university and study educational sciences. And during my studies, I was doing many, many things. I was also a teacher, so I was preparing future primary education teachers. And in that situation, I had to teach them pedagogy, psychology, sociology, many of the subjects that were compulsory for them to become teachers. But I was also the youngest, and I've been assigned in all the optional classes. So they were about conflict resolution and about tolerance and about enabling them to participate, to improve the image of their classroom, and so on. So without knowing, even at that time, I started engaging with topics of civic and citizenship education. And in some point, I wanted to continue my study, and I went to the Netherlands in Groningen, in Nijmegen, actually first. And there I had the great privilege to be acquainted with ICCS data. So you will hear from me. We have many rounds of ICCS study. They started in the 70s. I will tell you more about it. But I had the great privilege to study in the Netherlands and also to engage with this study and come up with my own PhD proposal. And during my research experience, I worked with all the data that was generated in ICCS on different topics and perspectives. And I also, searching to see a little bit what are the connections between practice and research, I engaged with policy. So as you heard, I had the opportunity to work for the European Commission, and I also collaborated with different organizations. And actually in between 2018 and 2020, I was in Mexico. I was collaborating with INE that at the time was running the ICCS study here, and I was also very honored to be able to be part of and organize the international expert group that informed to some extent the educational reform at that time. So it's not my first time in Mexico. I'm returning here, and I'm very happy all the time to engage with the researchers from this area. And as you heard right now, I changed the lens once more. So from the person that was using the data, I am the person that is now seeing the organization of the study. And we are now at the University of Bath. We have the International Study Center, and we are organizing the 2027 cycle of ICCS. I am the director of the study, and I'm sharing this responsibility with a fellow Mexican, actually from Mexico City. Some of you may know him. His name is Andres Sandoval Hernandez. And we are working at the University of Bath in a central group that ensures the coordination, but we are part of a consortium that is organized by the International Association for the Evaluation of Educational Achievement, IEA. And we have a group in Hamburg, and we have another group in Amsterdam, and then we have teams in all the participating countries, which now are 28. So it's a big enterprise, and once again, a different perspective. So why am I telling you all this? It's just for you to understand where am I coming when I'm framing this presentation. So I may change hats between the director of the study and the coordinator, and sometimes I will try to think about policy implications and practice. So this is how I'm trying to use all the experiences that I had. So what you could expect to hear from this presentation, it's a little bit about ICCS. I think it's important to understand the background and what this study can offer. To all of you, as I understand you, I have in the room researchers, but also students and people that are interested to work on this topic and with this data, and I wanted to give you a little bit more insights into it. And then I want to tell you a bit about the framework, because it's quite complex and quite rich in the opportunities that it can offer you. And then I'm going to zoom in into some examples, and these are examples that are based on my research or my research in collaboration with different teams, and that focus on the topic of tolerance and related concepts. Going back to ICCS, I think you heard earlier this morning, and I don't want to repeat too much what kind of challenges society faces today. So of course we have an increase in disinformation and polarization. We have the rise of populist and authoritarian tendencies, but we also have topics that are there for a very long time, that already in the 70s were very present both in policy and educational discourses. And this, for example, two of them that are persistent and are there for a very long time. It's a concern with the declining trust in participation in formal ways of participation, such as voting, of young people in particular. So this sparked research on citizenship education, but also the globalization and the mass migration and the increasing diversity in different societies that was experienced. And even to some extent at that point, we were talking, unfortunately, about violent conflicts and war, which now has become a daily topic that we all hear about. So this shaped already a long time ago, as I was saying, in the 70s, research on civic education, and of course the response to this societal challenges, part of it rested with schools and with the mission of schools of preparing citizens that are informed, responsible, and engaged. And of course, the answer to this was a high-quality civic and citizenship education, and this is, as you heard again a lot this morning about, very important in this respect. However, this is not so simple. Actually, when this discussion started, there was an overall discussion in education and educational sciences, and there was some research saying that schools don't matter, that everything can boil down to socioeconomic differences between students. So this was about all the educational fields, and it was also regarding civic and citizenship education, and that generated a lot of research that proved otherwise, that proved that what we do in the classroom over time counts. And it's not that other factors are not important, but we can do something about it. And I think ICCS throughout the years, hopefully I'm going to be able to make this point, contributed a lot to this discussion. However, and actually I had two very nice ladies that interviewed me before this session. They asked me, what is the place of citizenship education? And it's not, unfortunately, at the same level of other subjects, mathematics, reading, basic skills, that are often more important than policy agendas. And that translates into less care in the implementation, less resources, and less support to teachers. And we have to handle and deal with this in the way we do research and in the way different policy cycles changes. In Europe, we see a lot of going up and down, so improvements, and then a period of stall in which we go back to other priorities on the policy agenda, which is understandable, but unfortunately, this is the field in which civic education exists, and this is something that was already present in the past, and although we improved a lot in the recent years, we are still dealing with these challenges. So where did we start it with the ICCS, right? Many of you heard about a lot of international large-scale assessments, for example, OECD PISA, TALIS, that maybe sometimes are more prominent in these courses. But really the large-scale assessment, the comparative large-scale assessment started with some innovation work that was done by the IEA, and this was done early in the 60s, 70s. And at that moment in time, and much more than today we are fighting much more to convince people that we need to talk about a rounded set of skills, that we have citizenship skills and digital skills and math skills and literacy skills. Already in the 70s, with the study of civic education, they had an assessment in different fields of learning, including civic learning. So this was an initiative that originated, it was done by the IEA, but conceptually a large part of it was in the United States. Professor Judith Torney-Putnam of the University of Maryland was one person that contributed a lot, and of course the team around her at that time. So this resulted afterwards in the CVET 99 study, and I'm going to come back to this because I think it's very unique in the way the framework the framework for the study was constructed, and this informed previous cycles. So since then we had a 2009 cycle, a 2016 cycle, and a 2022 cycle. And as I was telling you before, this time we are in the 2027, and at this moment we are in a period in which we're running the field trial for the ICCS study. So to give you an impression of what we have at the moment, we have 28 participating countries. And unfortunately, the presence of countries from the Latin American region is rather low at this time. I will come back to this. But we do have an increase in the number of participants over time. And we do have, and we were very happy to be able to achieve this, we are able to implement in 12 educational systems an additional assessment at higher educational level. So the ICCS study, it's normally concerned with grade 8 students, 14-year-olds on average. In some educational systems, we'll be able to go to upper levels, upper secondary levels, grade 11, so we can see how they're doing later in their stages of development. As I promised, I'm coming back to the participation of the Latin American countries because we care very much about it, and we've been running to different conferences in Latin America and trying to get more people on board. So you saw that we had in 2009 a very good participation. At that time we had 38 countries, and then the participation dropped to 24 in 2016 in 2022, more or less. And now we are bigger numbers, but still we have less representation in the region. And as you can see, Mexico participated in 2016 and in 2009 and 2016, and it stopped. So now I'm not accusing anyone here, right? But maybe I'm trying to convince you, to get you on board, to help us there, so we get you back into the study, and because I think it's very important, and I'll try to show you why. Although we understand the reasons, sometimes there are political priorities, and I think also very important is the funding and the resources, so which are more available for European countries, which you can see are participating in larger numbers. So what is ICCS and what we try to achieve with this, right? It is quite unique, as I was telling you. It's the only study that is comparative and it's looking at civic and citizenship education. And what does that mean? It means that we are looking at different outcomes of civic and citizenship education, and we're not looking only at achievement, only in terms of civic knowledge, but we're also looking at student attitudes and their engagement, how they want to engage in political life. So from this perspective, we are already bringing a competence-based framework to the study rather than an assessment only of cognitive skills. Another very important feature, and we have a lot of information that is being collected on what different educational systems intend to do in the field, so the intended curricula at the policy level, but also how it's implemented. And we have different information from different actors, students, teachers, school principals, and people in the policy area. Also, besides providing some information on comparative information that helps monitoring trends, that maybe helps monitoring policies agenda, like the UNESCO Sustainable Development Goals in this setting, or other European Union policies, because we have so many countries. What we find more important is that we can, to some extent, identify what works in civic and citizenship education. So we can try to look at aspects of schooling that we can try to improve, and we can look at other educational systems and learn from it, or at least see what are our strengths and weaknesses regarding this. So I would say we are trying to be beyond rankings and be beyond just comparative assessments that rest there, and go more into learning something from the study, into more of a formative way of looking at it. So with this, I promise that I will tell you something about the ICCS assessment framework, just to give you an impression of the amount of information that you have there. So we are talking first about the outcomes that are being assessed in ICCS. So these are civic knowledge, civic attitudes, and civic engagement. For the civic knowledge, we have a test, a quite comprehensive test. It has a very detailed framework that you can consult. And part of this are aspects related to diversity. I will not focus on this today, but just for you to know that it's there. And the other parts, the civic attitudes and civic engagement, are we are having questionnaires of students, and they are answering on different aspects. So we have some information about their attitudes and engagement. I will come back to this to give you some example in a moment. What is very important about this framework, I was mentioning, it started from research. So it started from interdisciplinary research on civic education. So you have inputs from psychology, sociology, educational sciences, developmental psychology, And it was a way of looking at education in a holistic way. It was not about we are looking only at civic education and what the student does in school, but it rather situated the student in the context in which he's learning civic and citizenship education. So theoretically, it was built on ecological systems theory, situated learning theories, and so on, which, and with this in mind, information was collected from different sources. So socialization was thought of to be shaped by different environments. Some proximal context, the family environment, the peers, the media, what's happening in the local community, then the school environment, and here at different levels, because we are talking about the teachers, the schools themselves, but also the educational system itself. And then, of course, in this, the individual student characteristics such as socioeconomic background, but also political interest and so on, are taken into account. So it's providing a lot of information on different topics and throughout different ways of looking at it. So we have students that are informing on their attitudes and engagement, but also about their learning experiences at school, what they learned in the family, and so on. But we have also teachers. We have a survey of teachers that are talking about their teaching practices and also what they need in terms of professional development, for example. And we have questionnaires for school principals that are telling us about the different strategies that are implemented at the school level. And last but not least, we have a national context survey. So in each country, a person is looking at the curricula and is giving us some information of what's happening there. So a lot of topics in this area can be approached with this data. And then I said that I will come back a little bit to this, just because the examples I've chosen for you today are from this area. So we are especially going to look more in detail into the civic attitudes area. So here we have different domains in which we are looking with ICCS data. Attitudes towards civic principles, attitudes towards civic issues and institutions, and attitudes towards civic roles, self-image, and connectedness. In terms of civic principles, and a first example that I'm going to give you, it's this. We have examples such as how students relate to diversity, so their attitudes toward gender equality, towards immigrants' rights, ethnic minorities, etc. An example for civic issues and institutions are, it's the political trust that students have in institutions. And in terms of civic roles, self-image, and connectedness, one potential example, and I'm going to come back to this later, it's the way they see themselves as citizens. So what are the roles that a citizen has in society? I wanted also to mention, although I'm going to zoom into these aspects, there's even much more information if you're looking for different topics within the ICCS study. So as the study evolved, there were topics that were particular interest. And each time we are updating and seeing what's happening in society. So already from the beginning of the study, we have different topics that had to do with civic resilience. I made a reference on that, sustainability, global citizenship. Now we have an area that it's rather recent from 2016 on digital citizenship, and we're introducing an area on teaching civic and citizenship education was largely present there, but it's much more focused on controversy. You heard from Catherine earlier about this topic. Just to tell you that these are not add-ons, but are part of the framework, but if someone wants to study a specific thematic in there, you can find information at different levels, from the students, from the teachers, from the school, so you have a grasp of all the practices. And of course, one area that it's there from the beginning and is constantly being improved and given attention is diversity and inclusiveness, and that means that next to different attitudes that we're looking at from the student perspective, we know a little bit about what's happening in their environment from the students themselves, from the teachers, and from the schools. So as you will see in the examples that I'm giving, we can use that data to see what relates to student outcomes. So examples with ICCS data. So I included here just a few examples either my own work or work in which I collaborated with different other researchers in the field. It's not an exhaustive list. I try to have an overall impression, at least of the latest work. So you will see there some work that we did, for example, on measuring sustainable development goals. So you can consult those. But I tried to choose and pick some examples, and I think I have many criteria. I have to remember them all. But of course, I heard some questions today about where is the Mexican data. Well, the Mexican data is there, but it's there for 2009 and 2016. So I made sure to choose 2 examples that includes the data for Mexico and also for the Latin American region next to the other countries. So that was one of my criteria. And of course, the topics themselves that I wanted to relate with our discussion today. Another criteria that I had, and it's very important to me, for years now we've been working with interdisciplinary and teams from different parts of the world. So again, these 2 examples are of 2 projects that we conducted with attention to include researchers from Europe, but also from Latin America and other contexts, to have different perspectives, also from a theoretical perspective, and also the insights in interpreting the findings. So this was one of them. Another criteria yet that I had was that I wanted to provide you also with 2 methodological examples, so 2 ways of describing the data, and later you will see what I mean. And last but not least, these are open source, the examples that I'm going to present, so you can easily access it and look at that from this perspective. So I'm going to go to the first one. This is just to mention something because I thought it's very important in this context. We were part of a project, in a book project that was published in 2021. And this, I think it's very important, and it's giving evidence about ICCS over the years from different perspectives. It was a book that was edited by Judith Torney-Putna, I mentioned her before, and Barbara Malak, that was working for the IA, 2 people that were essential in the study and were involved throughout the process. So it has 2 parts. In the first part, you have different information from the perspective of different countries. Mexico has a chapter on it. I think it's chapter 11, yes. So you can have an insight on how data was used for research, but also for policy. So I highly recommend that. But I wanted to refer to 2 things regarding the topic of tolerance. We did 2 literature reviews. I was involved on the one about Europe, and then my colleagues, Andrés Sandoval Hernández and also Daniel Miranda from Chile, did the other literature review for the Latin American region. And I think they were quite revealing, because we could see different topics that are being approached. So there was some diversity, but there was a constant. The attention to tolerance, to equal rights, to immigrants, gender equality, ethnic minorities were in both sets of study one of the most important topics. And at the same level of importance was student engagement, student participation. So I recommend this as further reading if you want to know more about it. At least for me, it was highly informative. And now I'm coming to the first example. So I picked this example because it's another book project that we did for the IA Research in Education study. And this has many chapters, and we had a very numerous Chilean team next to the European counterparts that were here. And we focused this book on teaching tolerance. So I was mentioning before the ICCS assessment framework and the civic attitudes framework. So we are starting there from attitudes towards civic principles. And here, of course, the principles that are guiding here are equity. Of course, we're starting from the position that all individuals are equal. And equity is it's a very important principle to achieve peace, harmony, and productivity within and among communities. When all people have the right to fair and just treatment. And another relevant principle in this situation is pluralism. So recognizing and protecting the diverse opinions and interests that we have in society, so we can achieve a fruitful democratic decision making. How did we frame tolerance of diversity? We find that in this context, tolerance it's a precondition. It's something that that drives democratic interaction in different societies. So we've been looking at the different definitions on tolerance, and I think the one that made more sense for the ICCS study, it's a distinction between political and social tolerance. So political tolerance, it's the willingness to grant democratic and political rights to different groups in society. And if you contrast this with social tolerance is more about evaluating the direct contact with a person. So making friends with someone, marrying someone, having a partner from a different culture. So in the literature, we could see that to achieve political tolerance, it's much more difficult. It needs a higher level of abstract understanding, and this is normally built through civic education. While, so in some cases, individuals, even if they're socially intolerant, like they do not want to make friends with the person from another culture, they can have the information and they can be able to grant those people the rights that they deserve. So this framed overall the way we thought about the book. And what do we actually measure in ICCS? And I have to say that this is a subset of items. The scales that we have in ICCS are slightly longer, but we try to use this definition. And we also, in here, I'm bringing the methodological aspect. So in looking at the research until that point in time on this topic, you could equate tolerance with attitudes towards immigrants. So this is what you will find in terms of research done in this field. So we wanted to bring in this lens that we are actually talking about different groups. So we are looking now at it from the lens of gender, ethnic minorities, immigrants, and actually we should not stop there. We can think about other dimensions in which people can be categorized. But we tried here to, at least with the data that we had at hand, because this is what we're collecting, to look at this at the same time. So in methodological terms, this is done in the structural equation modeling framework. So we try to see how correlated these dimensions are, and we also took several steps to make sure that all these items are comparable across countries and that students are understanding the same things and they're rating the items in the same way. The methodology, it's called multiple group confirmatory factor analysis. I don't go into detail now, but in this book you have the details, and I assume if there are researchers interested in this position, we normally publish also the code and everything that we do from a methodological point of view. We had the framework behind it, and I'm not going to go into detail about it, but just to tell you that we looked at the outcomes, so we're describing these outcomes, but we also looked at different factors that can influence them at the student and at the school level. And this is one impression of the results. So as I said, we looked at this in concurrent terms. So one of the things that we found is that actually students that endorse one of this scales, they actually tend to endorse the other. The correlations are not very high, but they're above 50% in all cases. So we can support our assumption that these are correlated, that they don't exist in independence from each other. So here you have the average of gender equality, immigrants equality, and ethnic equality. So the attitudes towards all these groups. As you can see, you have a lot of variation between countries. I highlighted there Mexico for you because I know it's very difficult to see, but this is how big I could make the figure that it's reproduced in the book. And actually, Mexico and countries from the Latin American region are doing very well. I do have to remind you that this is 2009 data, and in the meantime, immigration, for example, became an issue also in Latin American society. So I will be curious to see how these results are looking right now. But in this situation, you see very well, especially in the attitudes towards immigrant rights, that in Europe you have lower averages on this account, while in other regions they are higher. What I wanted to say is that, again, we are talking in terms of averages, but if you look at individual items, you can see that there's some differences in the way students answer. So if you saw the slide before, you have sometimes some statements in which students are saying they should have equal rights in all aspects, and there you tend to have higher endorsement. When it's about jobs or about voting, and it's either a cultural or economic threat, then we have more variability. So just to tell you that this needs to be taken into account when we are looking at this kind of results. And then I wanted to just highlight a few of the findings. You will find much more in the book, but because we looked at different predictors. So first of all, what I was saying before is that we cannot look at this aspect separately. We could assume that to some extent they should develop in harmony. So if you have someone that endorses equal rights for immigrants, they will also tend to endorse other rights. What we are finding, and I have to say this is a finding that we keep continuing finding with this data, with the different cycles, it's that we have girls that tend to be more positive. So of course, when we're talking about gender equality, you may expect that, but we find a pattern consistent across time that girls endorse equal rights higher than boys. Then what we saw is that individual background characteristics are very important. So this have to do with socioeconomic status. So students that are more advantaged to endorse higher, probably on the grounds that they feel less threatened in those situations. This is just a potential explanation for that. Also when they're interested in social and political issues. But one of the very strong predictors, and in one of the first slide that I showed you with different sources, we did a policy brief about it. So what we found that the stronger association is civic knowledge. So it's very important what they learn in schools, and that's the most strong predictor in this situation. And then last but not least, and we find, and again, this is a finding that we reproduce and replicate with each cycle of ICCS, that when you have democratic school cultures and climate, and Catherine explained very well this morning what are the aspects of this. So we're talking about controversial discussion in the classroom, but also supportive climate. So we're talking about the interactions between students and teachers and students themselves. This seems to be something that in each context relates to the different attitudes. A part that is also interested in these books, we try to kind of think what will be interesting in terms of recommendations. So from what we found for both educational policy and practice, so from what we found is that we should try to look at particular groups of students, vulnerable students, and maybe when interventions could be designed, we could think at them from this level. So we are looking at socioeconomic status, levels of knowledge, interest that could be facilitated for some, with tailored intervention for some subgroups of students. And then there is a need to coordinated action. I think this is what we saw. It's not only about teacher improvement or their professional development, but it's really trying to create a context in which schools are supportive of this teaching practices in the classroom. And they try to safeguard the interactions also with parents. And of course, at higher levels, some standards on how to guide conversation and how to implement the practices could be a very good idea in this situation. So this was the first example. In the second example, and this is with data from 2016, as I promised, we are looking at profiles of good citizenship norms in youth. And we try to link those with attitudes towards immigrants, gender equality, and so on. This was part of the book. But I wanted you to have a look at these results, because it's yet another way of looking at the data. So first we started from theory. So this is about how students relate and how they see their relationship with the civic society. So what kind of opportunities and behaviors they should take as a good citizen. There are many frameworks on good citizenship norms out there. One that guided our discussion was Dalton in 2008. I will tell you a little bit about it in the next slide. So what we wanted to do with this book was to try to describe these profiles with the data that we have in ICCS, and also to relate it with different variables. We had a I really like this project because we had researchers from Latin America, Asia, and Europe. And then it's a book with different parts and with reflections on different regions, and it's a lot of analysis. I'm just scratching the surface of the iceberg with these results that I'm presenting. So what are we measuring? We are measuring a set of items. So students are just rating different behaviors for being a good citizen. So these are from very duty-based norms, just voting in every election, so very political participation behaviors that are there for a very long time, or obeying the law. But you also have forms of protest, or more other behaviors that are more contemporary, like supporting human rights or the environment. So as you can see here, the item on human rights relates to some extent with what we discussed before. It's another way of supporting tolerance in the world. So here the emphasis on taking action, but also it's also at a higher abstractization level, so you're not making a difference so much between groups. So this would be the difference with the previous example that I gave you. I mentioned Dalton before, so this is with 2016 data. It has been replicated with 2009. And this was based largely on the theory of Dalton. He was talking about different groups of students in society. He was talking about duty-based individual and socially engaged individuals. And his concern was that duty-based individuals, the size of the group is decreasing, and that you have young population that is not participating in formal political process anymore. So he was hypothesizing that this group will decrease over time. So this is what we tried to see with this data, how many groups we have. And for this, again, I promise I make a small reference to the methodology. We applied multiple group latent class analysis, but basically we meant to identify group of individuals based on their propensity or probabilities to belong to a group by endorsing or not one of these items. And we also looked at how comparable these groups are across countries. So we wanted to see if in each country you have an equal probability to belong to a group, but that doesn't mean that the proportions that are on those groups are equal. So I will give you a better understanding of this with the following slide. Are not my figures. This is Diego Carrasco from Catholic University of Chile. But I like them very much because I think they're very explanatory. So what we found a group that endorses all norms equally. So this is the well-rounded citizens. So their probabilities were high to be engaged in all kinds of civic engagement. Then we were able, and as I said, this was also replicated with earlier research, with 2009 data. We found a group that emphasized the importance of being active for the benefit of others. So this is where were the students that were particularly interested in human rights, sustainability, and so on, and a little bit less so on formal participation, such as voting. So this replicates to a large extent, what Dalton was talking about. It's also the same with the duty base. So this is a group of students that is more concerned about formal processes and citizenship behaviors that are more traditional to some extent. But then we find also other groups of students. We call this group monitorial, the first group. And as you can see here, you have kind of an indecision. So you don't have, they're kind of half of endorsing, they're just sitting there in the background. So looking at theories, there are the students that will probably act if something will happen in a political system to make them take action, but they are kind of dormant in the meantime. And then, of course, you have a group that is endorsing very low most of the citizenship behaviors. So these are some of the results. So now you can see here the different percentages that we have. So this is a complex set of results, but I wanted to just give you an insight on some general patterns. So first of all, as you can see in most of the countries, the first groups, the comprehensive and the socially engaged, form the majority of the groups. It's about half of the students. And also, in confirming to some extent in some of the countries, the hypothesis that Dalton had, this duty-based citizenship norms are not so much, this group is rather small in some countries with some exceptions. So for example, we can look at Denmark, where we actually did not expect it in this context, but we have some European countries in this group is sizable. In the Latin American region is not really the case. So if we look at the case of Mexico, a lot of students are categorized in the comprehensive profile and socially engaged profile, and the monitorial profile, just in waiting there, it's rather large as well in comparison with other countries. But what I wanted also to tell you here is that it's not only the differences between Mexico and all the countries or European countries, you can also see differences in the region. So if we look at Chile, we although the patterns are largely the same, there are some differences. They have a larger group of anomic students, for example, in the distribution of the results. So just to make the case that sometimes it's very good to look at neighbors and what's happening in other countries and see a little bit where you situate regarding this. I have a very quick other representation just because we carried out this analysis on a regional level. And I think here it becomes very clear that in Asian region we are talking about comprehensive norms overall. So I think we had Korea there that had an overwhelming proportion. And then in the Latin American region, the larger proportion is between the comprehensive and socially engaged one, and notably the duty-based group, it's nearly absent. And I think this is because students engage probably more with what's happening in society and are there. So even monitorial, they are still kind of attentive to all the aspects that are there. While in Europe, we have quite the largest group on the socially engaged side. So that means that they're more concerned with issues such as human rights, environment, and so on. And here also, if you go back to the book and the results, we have much more. I just give you a brief because I promised. So we did this analysis, and unfortunately, for this result, we were not able to include the countries in Latin America simply because that cycle of ICCS did not administer the scale in the Latin American region, the attitudes towards immigrants' rights. But what we found with the rest of the data, European data in particular, is that you have only an association between the comprehensive citizenship norms and support for equal rights for immigrants. For the other groups, it's not really the case, and it was surprising for the socially engaged group, where you would hypothesize that is the case. Of course, it's immigrants' rights, so that's a topic of controversy in many European societies. So that means that, again, depending on the group, there are differences, and you should be aware of the different interventions that we have. Here, last but not least, we can see, again, a consistent association. If you want to have students that are concerned with different aspects of being a good citizen, you have to form that in the classroom and throughout the school environment. And here are some recommendations I think are largely similar to the ones that were in the other book, but again, It's about going into classrooms and approaching different topics and really talking about citizenship from different angles, including the topic of tolerance in a broader discussion about being a good citizen. And with this, I'm finishing. And I just wanted to leave you with the idea that you have a lot of data at hand. We hope that you will join us very soon. Let's see how that goes. The study will continue every other 5 years. And I hope I convinced you by now that you have different kind of information and different kind of advantages when using this kind of data and learning lessons for researchers, for policymakers, for practitioners. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Agradecemos infinitamente a la doctora María-Magdalena Isac por su notable participación en la conferencia magistral y tenemos algunas preguntas precisamente de nuestro auditorio. Sí, perfecto. Bueno, la primera pregunta es, ¿quién es la persona o institución que establece cuál es la manera correcta de ser ciudadano? En México enfrentamos un secuestro de la educación pública a través de una ideología donde el resto de nosotros somos considerados malos ciudadanos. Sí.
I think I was slightly confused between the trying to follow the Spanish and the English, so if you can maybe repeat the English, sorry for that. Okay. Very good and very difficult question, I think, if I understood it correctly. I think it's always a discussion between society and what society has to say about being a good citizen, and then you have different voices and how that is being implemented in education. So from a policy point, that there should be a discussion at the policy level that it's informed by what students believe. It's the norms that are important in society, what the what the teachers are saying it's important, and all the entire society should participate to this discourse. Now, this is an idealistic way, and I know that this is the case of thinking about it, but I guess we have to keep trying and keep voicing our concerns so they reach the right people and change the system in the process.
Muchas gracias. La siguiente pregunta es, ¿de qué forma esta información y cultura cívica ha contribuido a la paz de la comunidad? ¿Quienes aplican todos estos temas conviven mejor en comunidad? ¿Hay algún resultado que así lo demuestre?
Okay, so if I understood correctly your question, it's about how the ICCS results may translate to direct communities. So I think here it's very important to say what ICCS and other large-scale assessment can and cannot do, right? So what we do with the data that we have is try to see what practices are there, how they're implemented, and how they have an effect. So we're giving some information about the educational system overall. How can this be used in practice and in the communities is not something that we can directly do, but we can signal different patterns. We can, for example, say that different methods seem to be working. We are doing this from a correlational perspective. So for this to be something that is implementable in practice, that means that someone, and I think it happened in many cases, someone is looking at the theory behind what we're doing, using the instruments that we're doing, and then goes into the field, implements an intervention, and sees and evaluates the impact of that evaluation. So to really look at the impact on the community level, you cannot do it with the type of data that we have. However, this data can inform those kind of initiatives.
Muchas gracias. La siguiente pregunta es, ¿Cuál es el valor añadido de participar en evaluaciones internacionales comparativas a gran escala como el ICCS para fortalecer la base de conocimiento sobre la educación para la ciudadanía y la tolerancia, tanto para los países individuales como para la región de América Latina? ¿Cuáles son esas principales limitaciones que deben de considerarse al interpretar estos resultados?
Yes, I think this question is quite related to what I just said. So we have limitations in large-scale assessment, but we also have the benefits. So what I can give you the example that I learned from this book that I was mentioning earlier on the influences of the civic and citizenship education study in several countries, and especially also in Mexico, to some extent. So what you can do, we have a conceptual framework, right? And given that that was built on theories and it's informed by research, it's giving you an impression about what kind of elements you should consider when you're looking at civic and citizenship education. I have to say that we in the process of creating this framework, countries are very much involved. So we have the national research coordinator that are coming and sitting together, and we have discussions about what's happening in their contexts. So you kind of have an overall idea of what are the most common elements. So when many countries started to revise their curricula, or maybe they did not have a curricula on civic and citizenship education, they started looking at these aspects. So I think this was a very important, and it happened in Mexico to some extent, as far as I can refer to what I know, but it happened in many other countries. So and it has happening constantly. Another advantage, of course, you have a picture of the educational system, so you can see where you have your strengths, where you have different areas of improvement. More specifically, what are the groups that are more vulnerable in this situation? Because with education, you kind of want to bring everyone at a level that they have similar opportunities for civic learning, something that doesn't happen anywhere else. What you cannot do, it's what I was saying before, you cannot really evaluate or have more qualitative findings. You can only do this with follow-up research. So in these countries, we did follow with using the instruments and in implementing different interventions, but it's not what ICCS is about. It's about the system, not so much about the individual student.
Muy bien. Muchísimas gracias. Finalmente, con base en los resultados de ICCS, ¿cuál sería el enfoque más efectivo e integral para implementar un currículo que promueva la tolerancia y el respeto por la diversidad?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, well, I think I touched upon this a little bit in my presentation from the results. I think what has become clear from what I showed you here, but also from other research that we conducted, from more qualitative study that we heard about, is that you cannot really implement this if you are not coordinating different actors. You are talking about controversial topics that are controversial in society, that sometimes are enjoying high levels of disinformation. For example, when we talk about immigrants in the European context, we overestimate. So students, even their parents, they always have the impression that it's a large group. So somehow there needs to be some coordination between the teachers, between the schools that should support them in approaching these topics correctly. And of course, the local community and the parents themselves, it would be good to be included in this conversation. But what we can see with ICCS data that works the best, it's really promoting this discussion and really controversy in the classroom, in a setting in which students feel safe to discuss this, and teachers feel safe to approach it.
Pues nuevamente agradecemos infinitamente a la doctora María-Magdalena Isac por su notable participación y también daremos entrega de un merecido reconocimiento por su participación en esta conferencia magistral.
Muchas gracias.
Como actividad final de este segundo día tendremos la cena del Congreso en el Museo Hotel Yeniv, que está fuera del campus. A quienes se registraron, las camionetas se trasladarán a partir de las 5:45 de la tarde y estarán frente al pebetero. También tenemos lugares para, si alguno de ustedes gusta acompañarnos, pueden acercarse al staff para que reciban información al respecto. Que pasen muy bonita tarde, noche y nos vemos mañana para continuar nuestro congreso. Buenas noches.